As we move on to our discussion of the practical aspects of objectivity and subjectivity, it's probably worthwhile to review what we covered from our previous discussion. We've already said that objectivity is an attempt to rest all knowledge on one thing that we can reduce everything to, a presupposition, if you will. It's a good way to put it. Whereas subjectivity is an attempt to say that we view reality in such a way that my experience and the way I interpret things is entirely different than the way you interpret things, and that one doesn't influence the other. There are no judgments that can be made based on that, and there are no presuppositions that we can all agree on to engage reality with. And if you remember from my previous video, there were challenges that I gave to both the objectivist and the subjectivist, that the objectivist needs to view his reality, his world, his surroundings, in a way that allows for subjective interaction. And for the subjectivists, I laid out the challenge that they need to assume that there is an external truth. There is something that is greater than their own perception. Good example being that someone who considered themselves to be a poached egg, we would say they're crazy. Why would we say they're crazy? Because they are clearly not a poached egg. They may perceive that. They may even have deluded themselves into believing that. But they are clearly not a poached egg. And their belief that they are a poached egg does not make them a poached egg. But as I said before, the purpose of this video is to look at the practical implications of these beliefs. How do we engage our faith with an objective and subjective perspective? How can we blend the two? What are the weaknesses of solely an objective faith? What are the weaknesses of solely a subjective faith? Well, if we are to reduce all things to one presupposition, if we are to hang our hat on one thing that we can know, then we find ourselves trapping our faiths into these boxes that we've created with our mind. Because ultimately, our faith is not about what we experience, it's about what we know. So do you see that subtle shift of emphasis? The emphasis is less on what God is doing and is more on what can I perceive. How can I place God in this box? What do I know for a fact he is doing? What attributes about him can I nail down and say, always this? How do I do that? That is the weakness of a purely objective view of faith. Now, a purely subjective view of faith has many weaknesses as well. For instance, a purely subjectivist cannot say that something is good or bad, because what is that relative to? Something that's good for me may be entirely different from something that's good for you. For instance, if I'm walking down the street, you come down the street and beat me up and steal my money, that was really good for you. You got however much money I had on me, which probably wasn't a lot. I lost it all. I've been beaten up. That's pretty bad for me. That's pretty good for you. But was there a moral wrong? I think that we would say yes. And again, going back to the challenge that I gave to the subjectivists, I think it's safe to say that that is a bad thing. Now, of course, there is much discussion that needs to go on regarding how do we determine what is objective regarding our morality and what is subjective. That's a conversation for another time. I'm just laying down the groundwork for the fact that we must concede that there is a need for objective reality, or at least that view regarding moral truths. Otherwise, there's nothing to prevent us from saying that the Holocaust was a good thing. And I would hope that we would all agree that is a bad thing. But to say that it is bad is to make an objective claim regarding our circumstances. And I want to move us in that direction. So as we engage our faith, let us understand that we can approach it in such a way that there needs to be some objective truth that we're comfortable handling. But there also needs to be a subjective aspect to our faith. We need to be able to engage our faith in some way. There needs to be some interaction. And I love the line from Troy where Achilles says, "Why did you choose to fall in love with a god? I think you'll find the romance a little one-sided." And I think we need to legitimately analyze our faith and see if there is any interaction. I think we have the right to expect it. And so I would just encourage everyone to test their faith. Whatever you're believing in, even if you consider yourself an agnostic or an atheist, test what you do believe. My point is saying is that if you're going to have any faith, it needs to have those two components, objective and subjective. The subjective cannot trump the objective, and we need to allow for some fluidity in our faith coming from an objective standpoint. If either of those things are missing, then we're not going to really fully experience any faith system as it needs to be experienced.